Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It is so good to be back for this one.
Yeah, today we are doing a deep dive into a book that is, well, honestly, it's basically a map of the territory you and I and everyone else are currently walking through.
Right.
We're looking at The Limits to Growth, Revisited by Ugo Bardi.
Which is just a fascinating, really crucial piece of work. And I think it's important to clarify right at the start for everyone listening. Bardi's book came out in 2011, but it's an analysis of a much older, much more controversial document.
The famous 1972 Limits to Growth report.
Exactly. The one commissioned by the Club of Rome.
Right, and before anyone listening rolls their eyes and says, oh, that old thing. The book that said the world was going to end in the year 2000, we really need to stop you right there. Because that assumption...
That exact assumption.
Yeah, that is exactly the crisis in perception we are here to talk about today.
Precisely. Because this deep dive, we're not doing a standard book review here.
Right, we don't care about Bardi's prose style or whatever.
Exactly. We aren't here to critique literary choices. We're using his analysis as an entry point to understand institutional systems. The whole mission today is to unpack the architecture of this model that fundamentally changed how we think about the future.
And maybe more importantly, to understand why that model was so aggressively, almost violently rejected by the global political and economic immune system.
Yes, the immune response is almost the most telling part. The premise Bardi sets up is pretty stark. He argues that the 1972 report was never a prophecy.
It wasn't a crystal ball.
No, not at all. It was a system dynamics model. And that distinction is everything.
Because a prophecy tells you what is going to happen on a specific date, right? Like on July 14th, the kingdom falls.
Right. It gives you a timestamp. A system dynamics model is completely different. It doesn't give you dates. It tells you how forces interact. The core misunderstanding here, the thing Bardi really drills down into, is that the entire world treated the limits to growth as a linear prediction.
They thought it said on Tuesday in the year 2000, the oil runs out.
Exactly. But Bardi argues it was actually a map of how exponential growth interacts with finite limits. It was always about the shape of the curve, not the specific dates on the x-axis.
And the crisis we are exploring today is really the gap between how that model actually functions mathematically and how it's perceived by the public and by economists.
Oh, especially the economists and politicians, too. It's a gap that has basically defined the last 50 years of global policy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To really grasp the model, we have to understand the foundational way of thinking behind it. Bardi talks about this massive shift from linear to nonlinear thinking. Can you break that down for us? Because nonlinear is one of those buzzwords people throw around a lot.
Oh, constantly.
Right. But in this specific context, it has a very rigorous mathematical meaning.
It does. And this is really the fundamental building block of the entire discussion today. So historically, science and certainly traditional economics was completely obsessed with linear systems.
Give us an example.
Think of ballistics. If you fire a cannonball, you can calculate exactly where it's going to land based on force and angle. It's strictly cause and effect. You add 10% more force, it goes 10% further. It's proportional.
It's like a clock, the clockwork universe. Predictable. If A happens, B happens.
Right.
Like if I push the gas pedal down an inch, the car goes 10 miles an hour faster. 2 inches, 20 miles an hour.
Exactly. But here's the catch. The world isn't a clock. The real world, particularly the biological and economic world you and I live in, is a nonlinear system.
And what makes it nonlinear?
Feedback. In a nonlinear system, the output loops back around and becomes the input. Bardi uses this great historical example of the governor on a steam engine.
Oh, the governor. That's the little spinning device that regulates steam pressure, right? You see them in old movies on locomotives with the little metal ball spinning around.
Yes, exactly. It's this piece of purely mechanical brilliance. And it's a classic negative feedback loop. So if the engine goes too fast, the governor spins faster. As it spins faster, centrifugal force lifts those metal arms outward.
Okay.
Those arms are physically connected to a steam valve. So as they lift up, they close the valve, which reduces the amount of steam entering the engine. Less steam means the engine slows down.
It's a self-correcting mechanism.
Right. That is a balancing feedback loop. It actively seeks stability.
So the system basically monitors itself. You don't need a human engineer standing there constantly turning a dial. The physical structure of the system keeps its own speed in check.
Exactly. But Bardi also points to biological models, which is where it gets really interesting for our purposes. Specifically, the Lotka-Volterra model.
The predator-prey relationship. Foxes and rabbits.
Right. This is crucial because it introduces the concept of oscillation. With the steam engine, you want a steady state, right?
Mm.
You want the train to just cruise at 50 miles per hour.
Yeah.
But in nature, you rarely get flat lines.
Because nature is messy.
Very. So in the Lotka-Volterra model, you start with rabbits. Rabbits multiply. That is a reinforcing loop. More rabbits make more babies, which make more rabbits.
That's exponential growth.
Exactly. And they will grow exponentially until the foxes show up.
Right. The foxes are the balancing loop.
They are. They eat the rabbits. But here is where the nonlinear part kicks in. As the rabbit population grows, the fox population also grows because suddenly they have plenty of food. It's a feast.
But they don't just reach a perfect balance, do they?
No, because of delays in the system. Eventually, the foxes eat too many rabbits. They overshoot the carrying capacity. The rabbit population crashes.
And then the foxes starve because they've destroyed their own food source.
Precisely. The fox population crashes, which ironically gives the few surviving rabbits a chance to recover, and the whole cycle starts over again. The system oscillates. It doesn't just go up forever, and it doesn't just stay flat. It waves.
So Bardi's point is that the 1972 Limits to Growth team, this was led by Dennis Meadows, right?
Dennis Meadows, yes, using the system dynamics series of J. Forrester at MIT.
Right. So Meadows and his team basically applied this exact fox and rabbit logic to the entire global industrial economy.
That is exactly what they did.
But, I mean, instead of foxes and rabbits, what were they actually modeling? Because the global economy is infinitely more complex than a forest and a math equation. We have stock markets, we have governments, we have human ingenuity.
Well, they built a computer model called World 3. And Bardi explains it had 5 main variables, or what they called sectors.
Just 5?
Just 5. Population, pollution, capital, which in this context means industrial output, factories, machines, infrastructure. Then agricultural resources, which is food. And finally, mineral resources, which are the non-renewable things like oil, copper, lithium, that sort of thing.
Okay, but 5 variables to simulate the whole world, that seems, I don't know, dangerously simplified. How can you possibly capture geopolitics or culture or innovation in just 5 buckets?
You don't. And that's by design. The model is aggregated. That's the specific term Bardi uses. It doesn't look at the economy of France versus the economy of Brazil. It treats the entire world as one single interacting vessel.
So it's blurring all the borders.
Right. It's looking at the big picture behavior of the entire planetary system. It's not trying to predict the stock market next week or who wins the next election. It's trying to map the pressure on the planet's physical limits.
Like thermodynamics.
Exactly. Think of it like a gas law in physics. You don't need to know the exact trajectory of every single microscopic molecule to know that if you heat a gas in a sealed container, the pressure is going to go up.
Right. The aggregate behavior is completely predictable, even if the individual parts are chaotic.
Exactly. And this whole methodology, the system dynamics developed by Forrester, Bardi describes it as treating the world not as a snapshot, but as a movie.
That's a really helpful way to visualize it. It's a process evolving over time.
Right, because most traditional economic models are static. They take a snapshot of supply and demand at one specific moment. System dynamics is entirely about flow.
Okay, so to really understand the mechanics here, we need to define 3 specific terms Bardi highlights: stocks, flows, and feedback. Let's do some quick definitions because these are essentially the building blocks of the universe in this framework.
They really are. Let's start with stocks. A stock is just the amount of something you have at a specific moment in time.
Like an inventory.
Exactly. The number of people alive right now is a stock. The amount of oil sitting in the ground is a stock. The total number of factories. A good way to think of it is water in a bathtub. The water level is the stock.
Okay, and flows.
Flows are the rates at which those stocks change. It's the water coming out of the faucet into the tub,
Right.
or the water draining out the bottom. So birth rates are a flow. They add to the population stock. Death rates are a flow. They subtract from it.
Extraction of oil is a flow. It subtracts from the resource stock.
You got it. Investment is a flow that adds to the capital stock, while depreciation rust basically is a flow that subtracts from it.
And so feedback is just the relationship between the stocks and the flows.
Yes. Feedback happens when the size of the stock changes the rate of the flow. If the population stock is really high, the flow of births increases. That's reinforcing feedback. If the pollution stock gets too high, it might increase the death rate flow that's balancing feedback.
Okay, so here is the real aha moment regarding the limits to growth model. The model wasn't about predicting the price of oil in 2010.
No.
It was about understanding how the structure of these feedback loops creates inevitable outcomes.
Exactly. Meaning it doesn't matter if you start with 100 billion barrels of oil or 200 billion barrels. If the structure of your system is built on exponential consumption, the outcome is structurally identical.
The date of the crash changes, but the behavior of the system, the overshoot and the collapse, remains a permanent feature of the structure.
You cannot escape the geometry of the loops just by changing the starting numbers. Think about a pond with a lily pad that doubles in size every day.
Oh, this is a classic riddle.
Right. If it covers the entire pond in 30 days, on day 29, the pond is only half full.
Which looks totally fine. You look at it on day 29 and think, hey, we still have half the pond left. We've been here 29 days and only used half.
Exactly. But if you somehow magically give it another pond, if you double the space, effectively doubling the resources, it just takes one single extra day to cover that too. The structure of exponential growth eats extra resources incredibly fast.
The Growth Report comes out in 1972. It's a massive bestseller with the
Right.
general public. But the economists, the academic and political economists, absolutely hated it.
Hated is almost an understatement. They despised it.
Bardi spends a lot of time on this. Why was the reaction so hostile?
It comes down to a fundamental, irreconcilable difference in how the two camps view reality. Bardi contrasts the World 3 model with what's called the Solow-Stiglitz economic model.
Solow-Stiglitz. Sounds like a high-end law firm, but these are Nobel Prize-winning economists, right?
They are Robert Solow and Joseph Stiglitz. This is the absolute bedrock of modern growth economics. And the economist's view is generally based on this concept of infinite substitutability.
Infinite substitutability. Explain how that works in practice.
It's the deep-seated belief that if we ever run out of a specific resource, the free market will simply switch to something else. Price dictates innovation.
So if we run out of copper for telephone wires,
We invent glass fiber optics. If we run out of whale oil for lamps, we dig for petroleum.
Mm.
If we run out of petroleum, we build solar panels.
Mhm.
In this worldview, the economy is this abstract machine that can literally grow forever as long as you have capital and labor.
So to an economist of this school, natural resources aren't really a hard limit. They are just inputs that can be endlessly swapped out. Geology doesn't really matter. Physics doesn't matter. Only money and human effort matter.
Essentially, yes. They view the Earth as a vending machine that never, ever empties, as long as you have the right coin. They believe that price signals will always solve scarcity. If something gets scarce, it gets expensive.
Supply and demand.
Right. And if it gets expensive, people are incentivized to invent a substitute. Therefore, true scarcity is never a hard limit. It's just a temporary hurdle for human innovation.
But Bardi and the whole limits to growth team, they completely disagree with this.
Violently disagree. Their view is the systems view, or what you might call the physicist's view. Bardi constantly emphasizes the laws of thermodynamics. You cannot produce something from nothing.
Right, the universe keeps a ledger.
It does. You cannot substitute your way out of the fundamental need for energy and matter. You can substitute copper with fiber optics, sure, but you still need energy to melt the sand to make the glass. You still need physical matter to build the cable. Technology helps, and we are definitely going to talk about technology later, but it is not magic. It has physical costs.
Now, Bardi uses a really compelling historical example to illustrate this exact trap, the whaling parable.
Yes.
This really stuck with me because it feels like a perfect, terrifying miniature version of our current global situation.
It is a perfect microcosm. Bardi and his colleague Levacki actually analyzed the 19th century whaling industry by building a system dynamics model of it.
Yeah.
It's brilliant because it allows us to look at a complete resource cycle that is already finished. We can see the whole arc, start to finish.
Okay, so set the scene for us. It's the 1800s. We need oil for lamps, so we hunt whales.
Right, so whales are the resource stock. Whaling ships are the capital stock.
Yeah.
In the beginning, whales are incredibly abundant. You send out a ship from Nantucket, you catch a whale easily. It's almost like fishing in a barrel.
So you have a very high return on investment.
Huge return.
Yeah.
So you make a lot of money. What do? You reinvest that money to build more ships. That's your reinforcing feedback loop. More ships means more oil, which means more profit, which builds even more ships.
Classic economic boom. Everyone gets rich. Towns like New Bedford become the wealthiest cities in America per capita.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the whale population is a finite stock. And crucially, it has a very slow regeneration rate. Whales take years to mature and breed. So eventually, the whales start to deplete.
Now, in standard economic theory, the Sala-Stiglitz view we just talked about, as the whales get scarce, the price of whale oil should skyrocket immediately, right?
It should. That's what the textbooks say.
Because supply goes down, demand is still there, so price goes up. And that high price should act as a signal to the market. It should tell the customer, stop buying whale oil, it's too expensive. And it should tell the whalers, stop building ships, there aren't enough whales to justify the cost.
But that's not what happened. And this is the critical, completely overlooked point Bardi makes. As the whales became scarce, the actual price of whale oil remained relatively stable for a very long time. It did not skyrocket right away.
Why not? If the whales were actively disappearing from the ocean, why wasn't the oil getting wildly expensive?
Technology. This is the crux of the whaling parable. The whalers didn't just keep doing the exact same thing. They innovated. They got better technology. They started building faster, steam-powered ships to chase the whales deeper into the Arctic ice.
They invented explosive harpoons.
Yes, they invented explosive harpoons to kill them much more reliably. They became incredibly ruthlessly efficient at hunting down and killing the very few remaining whales.
So the technology effectively masked the scarcity. They were extracting the resource way faster than it could regenerate, but because they were so highly efficient at it, the supply of oil hitting the market looked perfectly steady to the consumer.
Precisely. Technology allowed them to maintain the flow of oil, even as the stock of whales was totally collapsing. It hid the signal.
Wow.
The market signal of price totally failed to warn anyone about the underlying scarcity until the resource was effectively destroyed. By the time the price finally did spike, the whales were almost completely gone. The industry didn't collapse because they rationally chose to transition. It collapsed because the physical stock was empty.
That is genuinely terrifying when you map it onto the modern world. Because Bardi argues we are doing the exact same thing right now with minerals and fossil fuels, doesn't he?
That is the structural trap we are in. We look at the price of oil today and say, oh, it's $70 or $80 a barrel. That's historically reasonable, so obviously there must be plenty of oil left.
But we are using vastly better technology to get it. Fracking, deep sea drilling, satellite geological imaging.
We are running the explosive harpoon scenario on a global scale. We are using massive amounts of capital and technology to drain the absolute last, hardest-to-reach drops.
And because we managed to maintain the flow of production, the price stays relatively low, and we think everything is totally fine.
We are actively masking the scarcity signals. And this leads right into the core systems concept of delay.
Delay.
In complex systems, there is almost always a delay between an action and the reaction. You emit CO2 today, but the severe climate impacts hit decades later. You extract all the easy, cheap oil today, but the structural shortage hits you years down the line.
And our political and economic incentives are completely aligned with short-term feedback.
Entirely. A CEO needs profit next quarter. A politician needs votes in the next election. But the planetary system operates on long-term feedback. This mismatch is what causes overshoot.
Overshoot. That's the defining word of this entire analysis, isn't it?
It is. Overshoot is when a system grows beyond its sustainable limit because the negative feedback signals haven't kicked in yet due to that delay.
It's like Wile E. Coyote running off a cliff. He's technically off the edge, but he hovers there in midair for a few seconds before gravity realizes what's happened and he actually falls.
That is exactly it.
Yeah.
And Bardi's analysis of the World 3 model shows that this isn't some unfortunate accident or policy error. It's a structural feature.
Meaning it has to happen.
If you have exponential growth inside a finite system and you have information delays, you will overshoot. It is mathematically unavoidable. Unless you have perfect information and zero delay, which obviously doesn't exist in the real world. We are basically driving a car with a blacked out windshield, navigating by looking at a map from 5 minutes ago.
Of course we are going to crash.
Of course.
Okay, so let's look at the actual results of the simulation. What did the computer actually spit out back in 1972? Bardi talks about something called the standard run, or the base case.
Right. The standard run was the baseline scenario. They plugged in the best available data they had from 1900 to 1970. Population trends, resource usage rates, pollution levels, and they just let the trends continue without assuming any miraculous policy changes or magic technologies.
And what did it show?
It showed growth continuing beautifully right through the end of the 20th century. Everything looks great. Industrial output goes up, food per capita goes up, population goes up. We get richer. Somewhere in the early decades of the 21st century, basically right about where we are sitting right now, give or take a decade, the system hits a limit.
And I know this is crucial to Barty's point. It's not usually that we just suddenly run out of everything instantly, right? The mechanism of collapse in the model is really counterintuitive.
It is. Because the critics always say, look, we still have oil, we still have copper, so the model was wrong. They point to the gas station and say, look, fuel.
Right. So how does the system actually break in the simulation?
It breaks through the capital sector. And this connects right back to the whalers.
Yeah.
As resources get harder and harder to find, like drilling 2 miles under the ocean for oil or mining incredibly low-grade copper, or you have to develop more and more capital into the extraction process itself.
You have to build way more expensive rigs. You need vastly more energy-intensive refineries. You have to literally crush and move a ton of rock and just to get a single gram of gold.
Exactly. Think about it in terms of energy return on investment, ERO-EI. In the 1930s, you spent 1 barrel of oil's worth of energy to drill a shallow well in Texas, and you got 100 barrels back.
That's a huge surplus.
Massive. And you can use that 99-barrel surplus to do whatever you want. Build Disneyland, fight a world war, build universities and hospitals. But today, if you were extracting oil from Canadian tar sands or ultra-deep sea wells, you might spend 1 barrel of energy just to get 5 barrels back.
The profit margin, the energy profit margin shrinks drastically.
Right. And Bardi explains that eventually, in the World 3 model, so much of the world's available capital goes into just keeping the basic resources flowing that there is literally no capital left over for investment in anything else.
Wow.
There is no money or energy left to build new factories or schools or hospitals, or even to maintain the old ones. The depreciation of our existing infrastructure starts to outpace our ability to invest in new infrastructure.
So it's a death spiral. You are spending all of your energy just trying to get enough energy to stay alive. It's like an animal that has to run so fast to catch its prey that it burns more calories running than it actually gets from eating the prey.
That is exactly what happens. Industrial output falls because you simply cannot afford to maintain the industrial base. And because industrial output falls, the agricultural sector, which relies heavily on industrial inputs like chemical fertilizers, pesticides, diesel for tractors, it starts to fail.
Food production drops.
Food production drops. And finally, with a bit of a delay, the human population creates a peak and begins to decline.
So the collapse isn't, we woke up one morning and there was zero oil left on Earth. The collapse is, it became so incredibly expensive in terms of energy and capital to get the oil that the rest of the economy starved to death.
Precisely. It is an economic strangulation caused by physical limits. It looks like a severe recession that just never ends. It looks like bridges crumbling because we can't afford to fix them right now. It looks like food prices permanently spiking.
But surely, the critics ask this, what if you're wrong about the total amount of resources? I mean, we are always finding more oil. We find new lithium deposits. The Earth is huge. The 1972 team must have underestimated the sheer volume of reserves.
They absolutely asked that, and the Limits to Growth team ran those exact scenarios. This is what Bardi calls the robustness of the model. They tried just artificially doubling the amount of resources in the simulation. They even ran a scenario assuming we develop nuclear fusion and get practically infinite cheap energy.
They gave the model magic wands.
They did.
Did it save the world?
No.
It didn't.
It didn't. It just changed the specific cause of death. If you have infinite energy and resources, you just keep growing your industrial output. You build more factories, more cars, more power plants. But industrial output inherently creates pollution. And in the model, pollution is a persistent stock. It builds up in the soil, the air, the water. If you double the resources, the economic system grows much larger and much faster. And instead of collapsing from resource depletion, it collapses from total ecological breakdown.
The pollution literally chokes the agricultural system.
Right, or runaway climate change destroys the stable weather patterns needed for the global economy. Or ambient toxicity drastically reduces human life expectancy. Bardi's main takeaway here is that collapse is a structural feature of exponential growth in a finite system.
You can push the wall further back.
But if you keep accelerating, you will just hit that wall going much faster. The crash is harder. It is not a moral failure on our part. It is a mathematical inevitability of the system's design. You simply cannot fit an infinite curve inside a finite box.
That is just a really heavy realization. It feels very deterministic. But Bardi also connects this directly to the present day, doesn't he? He explicitly says we are already in the overshoot phase.
He does. He cites multiple independent data studies. For instance, the work by Graham Turner and also Kathy Alexander, where they compared the original 1972 projections with actual real-world historical data up to roughly 2010.
And how did the model do?
The match is frighteningly accurate.
The actual data lines overlap the 1972 simulation.
Almost perfectly. The real-world data for industrial output, population growth, pollution levels, they track the standard run curves right down the line. We are currently living right in the peak phase described by the model.
We are at the top of the roller coaster.
We are right at that tipping point where the capital costs of extraction are starting to eat the wider economy alive. I mean, if you just look out the window at the volatility in energy prices, the extreme fragility of global supply chains, the degrading infrastructure, these are exactly the systemic symptoms the model predicted we would be seeing in this specific time period.
Okay, but this raises a massive question. If the model was so stunningly accurate, if it essentially predicted the macro trends of the last 40 years so well, why was it ridiculed? Why is limits to growth the go-to punchline for so many economic jokes? You mentioned this report in a serious economic forum today, and you practically get laughed out of the room.
They really do.
Bardi devotes a whole section to the persistence of this denial. Why is the resistance to this message so strong?
This is where we get into the sociology of science, which Bardi analyzes brilliantly. He describes what effectively amounts to a media and political immune system. The global system actively defended itself against this information.
Because the growth-based system cannot accept a limit. It contradicts its prime directive.
Exactly. So how did it reject the transplant? First, they used the Malthusian slur. Critics immediately labeled the authors as neo-Malthusians.
Referring to Thomas Malthus, the 19th century economist who predicted global famine.
Right. Malthus predicted famine based on population growth outpacing food production.
Yeah.
But he was wrong about the timing because he didn't foresee the massive boost in yields from the Industrial Revolution and fossil fuels. So in academic circles, calling someone a Malthusian became a really convenient way to dismiss them as naive pessimists without ever actually having to engage with their math.
It's basically an ad hominem attack dressed up as a historical critique. If you label someone a doomer, you don't have to check their equations.
Exactly. And then there is the massive myth about the year 2000. I mean, I grew up hearing this all the time. Oh, those limits to growth guys said we'd have no oil by the year 2000, and look, gas is cheap.
Yeah, I vividly remember seeing articles mocking them for that. Where is the apocalypse you promised us?
That is what Bardi calls the wrong prediction myth. And he is incredibly clear on this. The model never, ever predicted a crash by the year 2000.
It didn't.
Not at all. If you actually look at the charts in the 1972 book, they clearly show growth continuing well past 2000, with the pressure and decline really starting around 2020 or 2030.
So where did the year 2000 come from?
The media seized on a totally misinterpreted data table about proven reserves and spun it into a prediction of total exhaustion. They built a straw man. When the year 2000 came and went without a global apocalypse, the media and the economists triumphantly declared the entire model completely debunked.
Wow. You invent a prediction they literally never made, you prove it wrong, and then you claim you've defeated their entire scientific methodology. That is wild.
It is. But there was also a much more institutional attack on the modeling itself. And this comes back to the economists again. Bardi details this really intense conflict between the hard sciences and the economic tradition.
Like the story about Paul Krugman and William Nordhaus?
Yes, there's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Krugman recounts how his mentor, William Nordhaus, who later won a Nobel Prize for his work on climate economics, ironically, he absolutely hated the work of Jay Forrester and the limits team.
Why?
Nordhaus basically felt like, how dare this MIT electrical engineer come into our sacred field of economics with his equations in his computers and tell us how the world works.
It was a literal turf war.
It was a massive turf war. Bardi calls it a clash between hard science arrogance and economic tradition. The economists felt deeply threatened. Because their models were linear, they were based on equilibrium, this core belief that the market naturally always finds a perfect balance.
Right.
Forrester's system dynamics models were nonlinear. They were based on dynamic change, delays, and structural disequilibrium. But beyond just academic pride, there's a deep functional reason for the denial. Discrediting the model serves to protect the entire growth narrative.
Because our entire political and social stability literally relies on the promise of growth.
Think about it. Every government on Earth, left-wing or right-wing, promises economic growth. We absolutely need growth just to pay off the interest on our debt. The entire global financial system is based on borrowing money today against the assumption of guaranteed growth tomorrow.
If you admit that growth has physical limits, the entire financial system basically becomes insolvent overnight.
Exactly. If a politician stands up and tells the public, the math says next year is going to be structurally worse than this year, they lose the election instantly. Therefore, any science that seriously questions the possibility of infinite growth must be treated as a dangerous error. It has to be wrong for the institutional system to survive.
It's existential denial. It reminds me of that famous Upton Sinclair quote. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it.
Exactly. Bardi brings up the Greek myth of Cassandra to explain this. It's a really powerful analogy. Cassandra was given the gift of seeing the absolute truth of the future by Apollo, but when she refused his advances, he cursed her so that no one would ever believe a word she said.
So she had to watch Troy fall, knowing exactly what was coming, screaming warnings at everyone, and they just ignored her.
That feels incredibly relevant to the systems thinkers today. The scientists are looking at the data screaming overshoot, and the politicians are looking at the stock market saying the market is bullish, everything is fine.
It is the psychology of denial. We humans are just not neurologically wired to understand exponential growth or nonlinear feedback.
We really aren't. We see a calm ocean, which represents the delay in the system, and we just assume no storm is coming, even if the barometer is plummeting. We perceive the world purely linearly. If it was fine yesterday, it will probably be fine tomorrow. We struggle deeply to process nonlinear threats.
Let's pivot and talk about the one thing that everyone always claims will save us from all of this. Technology.
Ah, yes.
We touched on this earlier with the whales, but let's go deeper. Because the economists, like Solow, they truly believe technology creates growth out of thin air, right? They literally call it the Solow residual.
Yes. In Solow's equations, whatever economic growth couldn't be explained by adding more labor or adding more capital was just mathematically attributed to total factor productivity, which is basically a fancy proxy for technology.
So it's treated as this external god.
It is.
Yeah.
It just miraculously appears from the heavens or from Silicon Valley, and it solves physical problems completely cost-free.
But Bardi and the system dynamics engineers see it completely differently.
In the World 3 view, technology is not an external savior. It is an internal variable. It is structurally embedded within the system. And most importantly, technology is subject to the law of diminishing returns.
Explain diminishing returns in the context of technology.
Okay, think about mining again. The very first technological improvement you make, say, moving from a guy with a hand shovel to a diesel steam shovel, that gives you a massive boost in output for a relatively small cost. Huge return on investment. You can literally move mountains.
Right.
But later, when you have exhausted all the easy mountains and you're trying to mine microscopic gold dust from thousands of tons of deep rock, you need supercomputers. You need satellite geological scans. You need toxic chemical leaching facilities. You need fleets of automated autonomous trucks.
You end up spending billions of dollars for a 1% gain in efficiency.
Exactly. The low-hanging fruit is completely gone. We picked all the easy apples, and now we are spending fortunes building million-dollar ladders just to reach the tiny, sour crab apples at the very top of the tree.
So technology doesn't magically eliminate the physical limits, it just pushes the boundaries back slightly?
It pushes them back, yes.
Yeah.
But Bardi argues that this often just allows the overall system to grow even larger and more top-heavy, so when it finally does hit the limit and crash, it crashes from a much higher height. It actually makes the final oscillation far more violent.
It's like building a higher and higher dam. Yes, it holds back more water for a while, but if it eventually breaks, the flood is so much worse than if you had just let the river flow.
Correct. And crucially, technology itself consumes massive resources. This is the dark irony Bardi points out.
How so?
Well, think about the green energy transition. To build solar panels, wind turbines, massive grid-scale batteries, that requires an unbelievable pulse of global mining, smelting, and manufacturing. You have to spend huge amounts of fossil energy today just to build the systems that will catch the solar energy tomorrow.
The Solow economic model completely ignores the physical thermodynamic cost of implementing that technology. It assumes you can just innovate your way out of physics.
Which you cannot.
So, looking at the World 3 model, was there any scenario where we actually survived? Did the computer ever spit out a happy ending, or was it entirely just different flavors of doom?
No, it did have a survival scenario. They called it the stabilization scenario, or the steady state.
What does a steady state actually look like in the model?
It looks like a deliberate, highly managed stopping of growth. True homeostasis. Bardi outlines the strict requirements to achieve it in the simulation. Drastic, immediate curbs on global population growth. Voluntary limits on industrial output.
Wait, voluntary limits on output? Meaning we actively decide not to produce more stuff, even if we have the capability to do so?
Yes. and massive, unprecedented investment in pollution control and soil regeneration.
Voluntary limits on output? I mean, that sounds politically impossible. Imagine a politician saying, vote for me, I promise you less stuff and no economic growth.
Which is exactly why it hasn't happened. Achieving the steady state requires a total fundamental overhaul of the entire global political and financial system. You would have to completely move away from a debt-based fiat currency. You would have to fundamentally redefine what success means for a nation moving away from GDP growth and towards stability, maintenance, and well-being.
And Bardi notes that the time window for doing this is closing, right?
It has already closed.
Hmm.
In the system dynamics model, the earlier you start the intervention, the smoother the transition. If I had started in 1972 when the report came out, it would have been a relatively gentle, soft landing. We could have slowly tapped the brakes.
But we didn't.
We didn't. If you try to start in 1990, it's a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
But if you try to slam the brakes on in 2020 or 2030, the attractor of the system, the mathematical state the system naturally wants to fall into, has already shifted definitively toward collapse.
The momentum is just too great.
The car is going way too fast to stop before the cliff edge.
Yeah.
Now you're really just trying to build airbags and survive the crash.
Okay, this brings us to the core of why we are doing this deep dive. We call the show Crisis in Perception. So, looking deeply at Bardi's analytical work on the limits to growth, what is the crisis in perception here?
Structurally, there are really four distinct layers to this crisis.
Okay, lay them out for us. Layer one.
Layer one is the map versus the territory. We perceive the standard run of the model as some kind of prophecy of doom that we can mock. We say, ha, the world didn't end in 2000, so you're wrong. But we entirely fail to perceive it as mathematical description of systemic structure. We attack the messenger Meadows, Forrester, Bardi, because we deeply dislike the message. We are perceiving an emotional political threat instead of looking at a mathematical reality. We are confusing the diagnosis with the disease itself.
Wow. Okay, layer two.
Layer two is linear versus nonlinear. This is the profound cognitive trap. We perceive the world linearly. We look at the price of oil at the pump or the amount of food on the grocery shelf, and if it's relatively stable today, we assume the underlying supply system is infinitely stable.
We fail to perceive the delay in the feedback loops.
Exactly. We are currently living in the overshoot phase, which temporarily feels like immense prosperity, but it is actually the rapid consumption of our foundational capital base. We mistake the burning of the furniture for the heating of the house.
That is a haunting image. Burning the furniture to heat the house. It works really well for a while. It feels nice and warm, but eventually you run out of chairs. Okay, layer three.
Layer three is the perception of technology. We perceive technology as a god, a completely external force that can somehow override the laws of physics. We think innovation is free. But structural analysis shows us that technology is an internal variable. It aggressively consumes physical resources and generates its own compounding feedback loops, which often just accelerates the final depletion.
We deeply believe we can just engineer our way out of the consequences of our own engineering.
We do. And wrapping all of that together is layer four.
Which is?
The ideological filter. We treat scientific warnings of systemic collapse as ideological choices. We frame it as pessimism or defeatism or an attack on capitalism rather than what it is, a structural constraint. We literally think we can vote against the laws of thermodynamics.
And this crisis in perception actively reinforces the very behavior that causes the overshoot in the first place. By completely refusing to see the structure of the system, we guarantee that the system crashes.
Exactly. It's not that humans are inherently evil, it's that we are entirely blind to the massive feedback loops we are living inside of.
You know, it makes me think, what if the ultimate technology we need right now isn't some new extraction method or fusion reactor? What if the ultimate technology is just a cultural shift in how we define progress, moving from expansion to maintenance?
That is exactly it. We need mind-sized models, as the computer scientist Seymour Papert used to call them. We desperately need cognitive tools to help us see these invisible nonlinear structures. Bardi's work and the original limits to growth model are exactly those kinds of tools. They aren't flawless crystal balls, but they are mathematically a hell of a lot better than the linear economic model that insists we can grow infinitely on a finite planet.
And I think that is exactly where we have to leave it today. It's a lot to process, I know, but understanding the actual mechanics of the machine we are riding inside of is the very first step to maybe finding the brakes.
Or at the very least, bracing for the turn.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.